So Charles Cullen was who we chose to do our presentation on. He was an American serial killer whose span of crimes lasted from 1988 all the way up till 2003. So he had 16 years where he was actively a serial killer, murdering up to 40 patients that he confessed to.
Charles Cullen was born on February 22nd, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey. He is the last of 8 children, including 5 sisters and 2 brothers. Cullen's father dies when he is only 7 months old. His first suicide attempt was when he was 9, and he mixed an assortment of chemicals together from a chemistry set and drank it. He was teased and bullied all throughout school, and in high school, his mother is killed in a car accident when he was 17. Also in high school, he tried to retaliate to his bullies by putting rat poison in their drinks, and ultimately led to him dropping out of school. He then enlists in the Navy. When he gets to the Navy, he is then again taunted and bullied by his shipmates. He is discharged when he is 24 after they find him stealing some supplies from the ship. One of his brothers dies from a drug overdose in March of 1987, and then he goes to nursing school and graduates 2 months later after his brother dies. He gets married in the same year of 1987 and has a daughter 1 year later in the spring of 1988. However, his first kill was several months after his daughter was born in June. He then begins to heavily drink and begins to psychologically and physically abuse his family and pets. His second daughter was born in the summer of 1992, and Cullen and his wife divorced in December of 1993.
Charles Cullen was a notorious serial killer who admitted to murdering 29 people who are listed here, but is suspected to have about 11 more victims. He didn't show a preference in gender, race, or ethnicity, but did seem to prefer the elderly. This relates to the fact that he's considered an angel of death killer, which describes those who intentionally end the lives of individuals under their care. Angels of death are often medical personnel and are typically active for many years before being caught. In addition, they're considered extremely lethal and maintain a high body count. A subcategory of angel of death killers are angels of mercy. These individuals perceive their acts as being merciful to the victims, hence why so many of his victims were elderly or chronically ill. He felt that they would ultimately be better off dead to spare the victim's family the pain of watching them die slowly. Cullen claimed he overdosed patients to prevent them from being coded, which is a code blue emergency that means cardiac or respiratory arrest. He wanted to end their suffering and prevent hospital personnel from dehumanizing them through revival methods. While you normally think that murdering people who you're in regular close contact with would increase the risk of getting caught, and usually it does, this is not the case when the killer is organized, intelligent, and methodical. However, Cullen stated that he killed most people on impulse and was dependent on opportunity, suggesting he is the disorganized type and simply lucky to not have been caught sooner. He blacked out the memories of his murders and therefore could not remember exactly how many victims he had or why he chose them in the first place. Police consistently told him that these individuals still suffered when dying, but he became defensive and refused that was the case. Additionally, some of his patients were actually expected to fully recover, so he would have had no defense against those killings because he was not saving them from anything. Regarding the methods of his crimes, he used drugs that had little use outside of a hospital setting that were less likely to attract attention. 22 of his victims suffered from an overdose of digoxin, which is a heart stimulant. He occasionally used other medications. He killed 1 with lidocaine, 1 with sodium nitroprusside, 1 with dobutamine, and 4 with norepinephrine. His colleagues were often suspicious of his actions, and some even witnessed him in rooms of patients he was not assigned to. Hospital computer records showed he was accessing files that he was not working and requesting medications that were not prescribed to his patients. Eventually, one of his coworkers alerted the police and agreed to wear a wire when talking to Cullen to gain evidence for an arrest warrant. Cullen has had a pattern of taking a long hiatus between killings, as shown in the 5-year gap between his first and second murders. This is most likely because of his multiple psychological issues spanning from suicide attempts to alcohol abuse. As mentioned before, he also had a pretty rough life in general, including a divorce, child custody battles, constantly being let go from jobs, having to declare bankruptcy, and losing family members. However, later in his criminal career, he begins killing more people more frequently. This suggested an evolution in his abilities and in his motive to kill. On the next slide is a video of an interview with Charles.
How did you choose who you were going to give this medication to?
It's difficult for me to go back in time and think about what things were running through my mind at the time.
Was it personal?
No.
Did you get pleasure out of it? Satisfaction?
No, I mean, I thought that people weren't suffering anymore. So in a sense, I thought I was helping.
Cullen suggested several times that his actions were merciful, but the evidence doesn't support it. 60-year-old Eleanor Stecker, an asthma patient, was recovering and in no pain when Cullen administered a fatal digoxin overdose. College student Michael Strenko, who suffered from an autoimmune disease, was recovering from what his parents called routine surgery to remove his spleen.
My heart, it aches for my son. It bleeds for my son.
We vividly remember Charles Cullen walking into the waiting room. He looked us right in the eye and stated how Michael was gravely ill and people don't make it. And my wife told Cullen, "That's enough. You could leave now." We're haunted by the memory of Charles Cullen coming to the waiting room to get our reaction.
There were people that you caused to die who were not near death and not suffering that much.
You know, again, you know, I mean, my goal here isn't to justify, you know, what I did. There is no justification. I just think that the only thing I can say is that I felt overwhelmed at the time.
Can you give anything? Can you give the families anything? Any explanation for how this happened and why this happened?
Like I said, I can't. I just can say that it was more or less, you know, felt like I needed to do something, and I did, and that's not an answer to anything.
So on December 14, 2003, Cullen was arrested on one count of murder and one count of attempted murder. On that same day, he admitted to the murder of Florian Gao and the attempted murder of Ten Han. On April 2004, Cullen pled guilty to killing 13 patients and attempting to kill 2 patients by the lethal injection in the New Jersey court. And in November of 2004, Cullen pled guilty to killing 6 patients and attempted to kill 3 more in the Pennsylvania court. Currently, Cullen is facing 18 life sentences and is ineligible for parole for 397 years.
This theory we chose is Robert Agnew's general strain theory. This theory identifies the micro-level influences of strain on an individual. He explains that people who feel more stress and strain are more likely to commit crime. There are multiple sources of strain, including failure to achieve positively valued goals, disjunction of expectations and achievements, removal of positively valued stimuli, and presentation of negative stimuli. Each type of strain increases the likelihood of experiencing negative emotions like depression, resentment, and anger. Anger is the most important because it produces a desire for revenge, energizes individuals to take action, and lowers their inhibitions. There are 3 types of coping. The first is emotional, and this is when someone does not acknowledge the problem and they're not trying to solve it. Behavioral is coming up with a way that will permanently solve the problem, which can either be positive or negative. The last type is cognitive, which minimizes or denies someone's feelings. Charles Cullen experienced strain throughout the entirety of his life. His father died when he was just 7 years old, and he was bullied all throughout elementary, middle, and high school. This created feelings of depression, anger, and resentment towards his peers. His mother died in a car crash when he was 17 years old, and he was bullied also by his shipmates when he was in the Navy and then discharged. He was rejected by his peers his entire life, and these major life events that happened created negative emotions for Cullen. He tried to cope behaviorally by trying to injure and kill his classmates with the rat poison at a party and trying to commit suicide many times throughout his life. After he was married and had kids, he began abusing his family and eventually was divorced and lost custody of his children. This also produced negative emotions and strain. All of these major life events caused strain on Cullen's life. When committing suicide didn't solve his problems or help his emotions, he began killing his patients when he was a nurse. He believed he was doing his patients a favor by killing them so they wouldn't have to experience the same strains and negative emotions he had felt all throughout his life.
So, policy implications for the general strain theory, I mean, they're pretty simple. Just the idea that like people go through stress and strain, and that how it can be dealt with, like going to different programs to get assistance, or even starting at a young age with K through 12 teachers teaching children that wealth isn't necessary for success, but turning to crime isn't the answer. And specifically in Charles Cullen's case, um, you can see how often he was in and out of psych wards, and his attempts at suicide should have been signs that he needed more help than he was getting. Um, at a young age, his teachers, seeing that he was older, policies like this didn't really exist. I mean, people didn't think about it in classrooms, so his teachers probably weren't looking to help him. But um, he was not in a situation where he like could have been helped because of his home life, and teachers not being able to see that. They had no way of knowing he needed the assistance without being taught themselves how to apply the necessary things he needed to help himself.